Hello, and welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Tips and Tricks to Streamline a Multi-CDN Implementation. Before we jump into the presentation, I would like to point out some of the features of the webinar platform we're using today. We plan to have plenty of time for Q&A at the conclusion of the presentation, so please submit your questions by typing them in the Ask a Question box, which appears under the slides being displayed on your screen. I also want to point out that there is a Resources tab near the top of the right of your screen where you will find several resources related to today's topic. And finally, it's my pleasure to briefly introduce our speakers. First, I'd like to introduce Brian Marks, who's a Senior Solutions Engineer with Limelight. Brian brings a diverse background to the table with his roots as a musician to working with many of the top 10 U.S. media companies as a trusted technical resource. Brian's 25 years of experience includes helping customers execute complex workflows, save money, and deliver a world-class user experience for their audiences. And our second speaker is Charlie Russell, who also happens to be a musician. He's a Senior Product Marketing Manager for Limelight. He also has over 25 years of experience in product management and product marketing with a strong background in video, networking, software, and storage. And with that, Charlie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Diana, and welcome everyone. Let's kick right into the agenda. Here's what we'd like to cover today. We're assuming that most of you are quite familiar with CDNs and are considering multi-CDN, but just to set the stage, talk a bit about the benefits of multi-CDN. But then we want to get into the implementation of multi-CDN environment. And that's really what the nuts and bolts of this session today is going to be about. We'll start with the challenges. So what are some of the challenges that companies face when they add a second CDN or a third CDN? And then when we get into how you make it happen, managing multi-CDNs, and then finally get to some workflows, because the reality is every environment is different. Those of you on the call, those of you watching this video, your environment's different from the others, and it's got its unique attributes, and so implementing multi-CDN is going to depend on those attributes as well. So Limelight has been doing multi-CDN for years, and we've got a lot of experience, and based on that experience, we want to, again, introduce these challenges, how you manage it, but also some representative workflows and how they bring specifics to the mix. And then we'd like to open it up for Q&A. So as Diana mentioned, you'll see an Ask a Question box. If at any point during this presentation you have a question you want to ask, punch it in and we'll get to it at the end. So let's press on. Benefits of multi-CDN. There are a number of reasons why people might want to choose to advance to a multi-CDN environment. One is availability of the resources and availability of the content to reach every user every time. Performance is a huge reason. You can have higher performance, and the quality and the speed of response can particularly be a factor for multi-CDN. Capacity and scale. If you want to reach a large audience, if you're doing a large event or you're looking to scale up your business, capacity and scale is a key benefit. And then regional coverage, giving you greater reach in geographies around the world. And finally, diversification. You will want to eliminate reliance on just one vendor. So those are some of the general benefits of multi-CDN. Here is what a single CDN delivery might tend to look like. You have your content, and you're trying to get it to your audience. It's that simple. So whether your content is web content, live video, video on demand, or file distribution, you're using a single CDN today to deliver your content to your audience. What Multi-CDN introduces is not just another CDN, but CDN selection process. And that's one of the things we'll cover in this webinar today. There are a number of different methods that can be used for deciding which CDN will serve which user. So after that brief introduction, let's get right into it. The challenges of implementing Multi-CDN. And at this point, it is my great pleasure to introduce again Brian Marks, Senior Solutions Engineer. Brian's been involved in a lot of Multi-CDN implementations and brings a wealth of experience in understanding what these challenges are and how to make it happen. So we'll talk about technical pitfalls and issues as well as resource issues, the impact on your resources. So Brian, I'll hand the mic to you. Take it away.
Thank you, Charlie. Just to start out, Charlie, really quick, I can't see the slides on my machine, so you're just going to have to forward them for me. Let's go into the technical pitfalls and issues. Let's start out with some workflow changes. So obviously bringing in a second CDN, there's going to be some changes that you're going to have to make in a workflow perspective. So both on how you get that content into the CDNs and then how your client is going to decide on what CDN delivers what content. Those are going to have some changes involved, and we're going to go through each of those workflow changes here in a second. The second is configuration parity. So most of you are already using one CDN. So to add a second CDN in there, you're going to have to make sure that the configurations are similar. Make sure things like security and URL protection, if you're using that on one CDN, that you're going to be able to use that on the second CDN. So just parity between the two CDNs to make sure that they're similar. And the last one is managing multiple CDNs. So when you do make those configuration parities and you have to make sure that everything is the same, then you're going to have to learn how to, on that second CDN, how to change those configurations, and also how to look at things like reporting, making sure that the CDNs are reporting correctly and that you are able to use the reporting in a way that works for your workflow. Next slide, Charlie.
Okay, so we're now looking at cost and resources impact.
Yeah, so let's talk about some of the costs and resource impact that you may have when you're implementing a second CDN. The first one would be a developmental cost. So obviously you're going to have to change some things on your end, primarily you're thinking about the player. So what changes are you going to have to implement on the player side, and what development is going to, how is the development going to change the player side of things? Also in uploading things, if you're uploading things via API, programmatical, those types of things. So that cost may come into play. The implementation cost, so if you think about on the client side, where you have a decision engine on the client side, you may have to bring in a third party to make those decisions for you on the client side. And finally, a training cost. So you're going to have to train your staff on implementing a new CDN, learning a new portal, teaching your employees about how to implement the CDN and things like that. So that's where the training cost would come into play.
Okay, great. Thanks, Brian. So now we want to get into more of the challenges of managing multiple CDNs. So there's three general topics here. CDN selection, we talked about that a little bit at the beginning. There are a number of different methods that can be used to decide which CDN to serve which user session. The second factor is going to be security, making sure that you're protected, your content is protected, your customer is protected. And then finally, performance tracking, so that you're able to understand near term and over time how the different CDNs are performing. So let's go on to the first slide, which is CDN selection method number 1 using DNS.
Yeah, thanks, Charlie. So when you think about your client and how the decisions are made on what CDN is going to serve what traffic, the first thing that I brought up here is a DNS method, so a DNS load balancer. This is switching based on up or down, a percentage of traffic, and a geolocation. So most CDNs, and there are a lot of third parties also out there, offer DNS load balancing. And basically the way that it works is it just changes the published host. So what you would do, instead of pointing all your customers at, say, content.cdn-a.com, you're now going to point them at a new domain name, which might be, cdn.loadbalancer.com. And then when people hit that URL, then there's certain decisions that are made within the DNS load balancer that will point your clients to whichever CDN is best to serve that traffic. That could be based on cost. It can be based on, is the other CDN responding or not? Also a certain percentage. Limelight offers a tool that can do this for you called the Traffic Director. But the good parts of this is it's very easy to implement. Obviously, the only thing that you're changing is the published host in the URL that people are hitting to deliver that content. It's generally less expensive to do this. It depends on, the other methods that I'll go into and what the companies are offering there. It's proven technology. It's been around for a very long time. So it's something that most technologies will support. And also you have a lot of vendor options out there. So there's a lot of vendors out there that do DNS load balancing, from cloud providers to CDN. So you have a lot of options for delivering that, for using the DNS load balancer. The not so good is the limiting switching and decision engine that you're looking at that makes a decision on what CDN to choose. So if you look at when something comes in and you have to decide on what CDN delivers that content, as I already mentioned, it's going to be based on maybe a percentage of traffic, maybe a geolocation, is that up or down? It doesn't rely on any kind of end user data. There is a few exceptions to this. There are a few DNS load balancers out there that use end user data based on a JavaScript that's placed into a website, that type of thing. The other part that's not so good is it requires CDN configuration parity. So if you look at the path to file, for instance, those have to be identical because all you're changing out is the actual cdn.loadbalancer.com. So that's important to realize that it does require that your CDN configurations are the same. Next slide, Charlie.
Okay, great. Yeah, this is a good perspective to see the good and the not so good. So the second CDN selection method, programmatic.
Right. So programmatical CDN decision engine is usually based into the client. And from what I've seen out there, there's a lot of vendors. There's a few vendors that offer this, and this is primarily on the video playback side, right? So when you're delivering segmented video, HLS, or Dash, things like that, it gets a little more complicated on how you're going to make decisions based on what CDN is going to deliver what traffic. A lot of the third parties out there are split into two different options of implementation. One might be at the manifest level. So if you are delivering HLS or Dash, then what they can do is they can generate that manifest for the video on the fly. And within there, they can decide on what CDNs are delivering what traffic just by plugging in those CDNs on the manifest side. The other option is API. So the player, when it receives a request to play a video, it would reach out to an API provided by a third party that would decide how much traffic is going to be sent down what CDN, or what traffic is performing better at the client side. Because this thing is built into the client side, a lot of it can be based on real end user data. So how much is that video buffering? What is the average bit rate that's being delivered? What is the startup time? So you can set your QoS to really deep technical understanding of your client and how to make those changes within the player to decide which CDN actually delivers that content. So the good is obviously you have a lot of data that you can use to drive that CDN consumption. It goes really deep, and you can make some really good decisions, and your ROI on that would be very high. The not so good is there's more resources to deploy. So sometimes it can be a little bit complicated to roll this into your player. So if you're using JW Player on the video side or something, that's something that would have to be implemented in order to make those CDN decisions.
All right. And we got the third slide up now, CDN selection method by content type.
Sure. So this is if you have a website and you're delivering a website, one of the easier ways is on the content management side to just call out what CDN will deliver what content. So you can use, for instance, images.cdna.com. So CDNA would deliver all your images, or say your static content. And you can also, and if you're looking to deliver dynamic traffic, then you can deliver all dynamic traffic through a second CDN provider. This is all done on the content management side. It's all done within your HTML. So that's something that you'll have to look at on, controlling your CMS and controlling the domains on what content is delivered through what CDN. But if also with your delivering websites, you can also use the DNS load balance approach, where you just switch out your published host on your website side, and you can make decisions based on there. So really, if you just do a content based on content type, it's a pretty straightforward. The good, it's easy to implement. There's no decision engine needed on the client side. It's all done on your HTML side, so there's no decision engine that's really needed. The not so good, it's not really load balancing. So if you do put in a publish host for CDNA to deliver all of your static content, then that's what's going to be delivering all of your static content. And also vice versa, if you're using CDNB to deliver all your dynamic, then that CDN will be delivering that dynamic traffic. If anything happens to that CDN, or if they're having a hard time delivering in a certain region, it's not going to help. You're not doing any type of a load balancing.
All right. Well, so it's interesting to see all three of those methods. And Brian, you would guide people through, you would help them understand what the pros and cons are suitable to their workflow. What are some of the things that you might be talking about in terms of helping people understand and decide which one to use?
Well, I think it's based on content. What are you trying to deliver? Are you trying to deliver video? If you are delivering video, are you delivering primarily HLS traffic, or are you delivering dash traffic, those types of things? What's important to you? Is it important to you that you need to make sure that you're delivering the highest bit rate? You're trying to combat a lot of rebuffering, those types of things, because if you're going to base your decision on that, then you're going to have to look at more of a programmatical approach, or the API approach or the manifest approach, and use a third party that can make decisions based on real end user data. If you're using, say, file downloads, we'll go into the workflows, but if you're using a file downloads, then a download manager would be the best way to go, because usually when you're talking about file downloads, you're talking about large files. You need to make sure that you can resume a download that gets cut in the middle of the download. So it's really based on the content that you're trying to deliver and what analytics you can see in order to improve the performance.
Okay, great, thanks. All right, let's shift gears now and talk about security, protecting your content in a multi-CDN world.
Yeah, so I think when I brought up this slide, and when you think about the concept of security, most of you, if security is important to you, you've already have the security rolled out on CDN, on your current CDN. So how does that look in a multi-CDN environment? So what I decided to do is, if you start on the left, you start on your end or the origin side that goes all the way over to the client on the right side. So as far as video is concerned, we'll get right into kind of DRM. DRM is important to a lot of people. Sometimes it's something that's difficult to think about, or difficult to implement. But really what I wanted to be clear about DRM is if you're already doing it on one CDN, it's going to be straightforward adding in another CDN. And when we go into the workflows, I'll show you that primarily DRM is done on the encoding side on the video. So the encryption is encoded into the video. So when the CDN delivers it, it's just delivering encrypted content, and then it's decrypted on the client side. So implementing multiple CDNs usually isn't that big of a problem because the things are already implemented within your workflow. Core support,
okay,
our
now,
browser has...
Jump in. DRM is digital rights management. People in video probably know that, but in case you don't, DRM is digital rights management. Go ahead. Back to core.
That's right. Sorry about that. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about core support. It's origin scripting. It's something that when browsers request content, they're expecting a specific header to be returned. It's something that's become very prevalent in video delivery within the last 2 years. Generally, these are configured on the CDN side. So the CDN is responding back with a header when the browser, basically what it is, it's cross-domain support. So if you have your website and it's calling a piece of content from a different website, it's crossing domains, and the browser will want to make sure that that's okay. So these core supports are actually rolled out at the CDN level. So the main thing that you want to make sure when you're in multiple CDNs is that your core's responses match across both CDNs.
And CORS is cross-origin resource sharing.
That's right. Basically what it is, like I said, is when there's a different domain requesting the different content, that it's okay to serve that content. Access control. So basically on the CDN level, within Limelight, we can control access to content based on an IP address. It could be a whitelist, it could be a blacklist. It could be based on geo. I only want to see this content in North America, or I want to exclude North America, things like that. But again, these are things that are done at the CDN level, and you just want to make sure that those configurations are the same across both CDNs. You don't want to obviously block US on one CDN and then not block US on the other CDN if you're just doing some kind of simple load balancing. Same goes with SSL or HTTPS delivery. It's done on the CDN side. Usually your certificate is hosted with the CDN, and so that handshake of that certificate is done at the edge of the CDN. So you want to make sure that you're delivering HTTPS on both of your CDNs. Talk about the paywall on the client side. So this is more on the client side, where when you log in to watch a video, it could be a paywall where you have to, pay money to watch the video. Maybe it's, you want to block certain people or allow certain people. That's really done on the client side, so it doesn't really affect how many CDNs you have delivering that traffic. And then finally, URL protection. So URL protection is a way of protecting the URL. And what it does is it adds a query string to the end of the URL, and it makes sure that when people go to hit that URL, there's a shared secret that's known between the CDN and the client, and a time to live. So that URL might be only good for 10 minutes, and then that URL is no longer valid and won't be delivering any kind of content. So the URL protection is something that is configured on the CDN side, but you have to use your client to generate those URLs. So that's why I put it on the client side.
All right, good. So let's keep it moving and get to the final point in this sort of general part of the session, which is performance tracking. Brian, take it away.
Yeah, so obviously if you're looking at using dual CDNs, performance is important to you, right? So you want to make sure that you have a high ROI on your content. You can't afford any kind of downtime. So how do you know once you implement that second CDN that things are going better for you? So the first thing that I have listed here is capturing logs. So maybe if you already have a CDN, you're already pulling down raw logs, you're already parsing raw logs. What you're going to have to do now is you're going to have to pull down logs for the second CDN, parse those logs, CDN can give you server-side information, things like response times, how much traffic is being delivered, things like error codes, success codes, things like that, what IP is requesting that content. So there's a lot of important information in the CDN log side, but it's just server-side information. It doesn't go deep into the ISP, or it doesn't go deep into your individual clients and give a good perspective of how are your individual clients consuming your content. The next one is static reporting. So there's companies out there that roll servers out across the globe, and what they do is they have servers that just request your content and then report back to you on how it went. It took it this long to download that file. There's even companies out there that will pull up a video and tell you what was the performance of that video. I call it static reporting because it's not really your clients that are requesting that content. It's a third party that you hire to request your content to report back to you on how that content is doing. You're going to get a little bit deeper of an understanding of your content and how it's being consumed through static reporting. Finally, capturing client analytics, RUM, real user metrics. This is very important in the video side. It's also very important on the file download side and on the web side. Basically what it does is it sits on your player, on your web page. You might have some JavaScript on your web page, and it reports back to you exactly the experience that your clients are getting. It goes very deep. It can understand a lot of things that the other logs and static reporting can't give you, because it tells you exactly how your clients are doing and what the performance is. So it's a very important way to understand those things.
All right, great. Well, so now we've wrapped up some good general information, and Brian, thank you so much. And now we're going to move from the general to the specific. And we've got a number of workflows that we want to touch on, and hopefully some of them will be familiar to you, and they'll provide useful information specific to those of you on the call. We've got live video and live video using DRM with pre-transmuxed video. We've also got video on demand and video on demand pre-transmuxed with DRM, again, the digital rights management. And then a sample workflow for website delivery and a sample workflow for file download. And then finally touch briefly on the role that storage plays in a multi-CDN environment. So, Brian, I'm switching over to live video without DRM. It's all yours.
Yeah, let's get into the fun stuff. So I'm going to start at the video side of things. And as I was going through this and we were building the slides, it kind of occurred to me that really implementing a second CDN as far as on your back end is not as hard as what the CDN selection process is. So I've already gone over the CDN selection process. And if that's something that you've already worked out, I think you're pretty far along in the process. So let's talk about live video. I'm just going to start there. It's kind of where I live. It's what I enjoy doing. So live video can be a live event, or live video can be a live linear, which a lot of the OTT customers are going with now, that we're seeing more and more of, where you're just taking on-demand content, putting it into a line, and then providing that on-demand content as a live stream, or linear live is what we call it. So basically, you'll have a camera starting from the left. You'll have a camera or a playback device. So it could be your playout machine. It could be a camera. That content is shot. It's sent into an encoder. That encoder will break that content into your different bit rates for multi-bit rate consumption in a video world. Next, that's sent out to a transmux engine, and that transmuxing engine will actually segment that content and create playlists if you're delivering HLS or Dash, those types of things. So when you go back over to the right, when the request comes into CDN-A, CDN-A will deliver that content, those segments. Usually a CDN will be just delivering the segments of video. If that video is in cache within the CDN, it'll just deliver that content. If it's not in cache, it'll reach out to a transmuxing layer and pull that content into the CDN. We're also seeing more and more where there's a push. So you can actually have your encoder slash transmuxer push those segments into the CDN. But as you can see, each CDN would just be set up to pull content from that same location. So it's really not that difficult to manage. You just have to make sure that those configurations are the same and they're pulling content from the correct area. As you can see, the CDN selection is normally where you're really going to be spending a lot of your time. Next one, Charlie.
All right. Now we got live video pre-transmuxed with DRM.
Yeah, so I wanted to talk about this because of DRM, and a lot of people are afraid of DRM, and then if you introduce a second CDN, it's going to cause a lot of problems. But as you can see, it hasn't really changed the workflow a lot. If you already are pre-transmuxing all of your live video, basically you're going to be pushing those transmuxed content into a storage or a temporary storage, maybe a caching layer, where CDN A, when it has a request for a specific segment, if it's in cache, it'll just deliver that content. If it's not in cache, it'll go back and pull that content in. Again, you just have to make sure that your CDNs are set up correctly. And I wanted to point out here where the DRM is done. It's usually done on the transmux layer, but sometimes you can add DRM on the encode side. So it really depends. Some CDNs will offer you and DRM on the fly, so it's added in when the transmuxing happens. Or some companies are very tight on security, and the files need to be secured from the MP4 layer, so pre-transmux. Anyway, whichever way you do it, the DRM is done before the CDNs will actually pull that content. So when the CDNs go to deliver the content, it's already pre-encrypted, it's already DRM'd. We're just delivering chunks. It gets sent out to the CDN selection. Once it's done on the client level, then you'll have the DRM pulling down the keys, making sure that that content is okay to play. So I just wanted to kind of point out that the DRM is actually a pretty simple process within a multi-CDN world.
Great. Okay, let's switch over to video on demand.
So on-demand files. So if you have a video that's in, it could be ProRes or Super HD, so you'd have a mezzanine file. Now you want to deliver that content through multiple CDNs. Again, you take the file, it gets sent through an encode layer, a transmux layer that could be a video platform, it could be a cloud encoding platform, it doesn't really matter, but it gets sent into a system that pre-encodes it, pre-transmuxes that content and sticks it out onto a storage. And then from there on, it follows the same path as the live. So you have CDN A, again, content is in cache, it'll just deliver that content. If it's not in cache, it'll go back to the storage and pull that content. I think one important thing to realize is that if you look at both CDNs, you are doubling your traffic back to your storage. So you want to make sure that wherever your storage is, whether you're storing it on a CDN like Limelight or storing it on a cloud storage, that you have the bandwidth where both CDNs can pull that content in from the storage.
Okay, now again, VOD adding DRM to the mix.
Yeah, again, this is just kind of covering if you already have pre-transmuxed content, you're not starting from a mezzanine, you can see that the DRM really doesn't come into play at all when you have a multi-CDN environment.
Okay, so we've talked about live video and video on demand. Now let's shift over and talk about website delivery.
So I already kind of covered this on the CDN switching side where you use different domains to deliver different content. So that's really just what this is pointing out, where you might have CDN A delivering dynamic content, you might have CDN B delivering static content. So when the request comes in for, say, images.website.com, those might go through CDN B. If it has that in cache, it'll just deliver that content. If it doesn't, it just goes back to your origin or your website, and it pulls that content in and then delivers that content. So it's a pretty straightforward process when you can split those domains out. But as I stated before, if you don't want to split those domains out and everything is living under your www then you would have to utilize some kind of either DNS load balancer or some type of CDN selection like that.
Okay, that sounds great. We have one final workflow to talk about, which is file download.
Yeah, so I wanted to point this out. As you can see on the left side to the mid of the slide, it's really similar to everything else that you've seen, right? A CDN has a request for a file. If it doesn't have it, it just goes back to the storage and delivers that content. But what's important to point out here is the download manager. When you're dealing with file downloads, again, I've already kind of covered this, but you're dealing usually with large files. So the download manager has certain things that are built into it that allow you to resume a download if it gets broken, things like that. So that's the main thing that I wanted to point out here. If you are delivering software updates or, big files, then this is the way that your workflow would look.
Okay, great. One last topic to touch on, which is storage and storage within a multi-CDN environment.
So we talked about this a little bit early in the workflow. So when you think about storage and how you store your content and how do you think about that in a multi-CDN world, it really doesn't change a whole lot. If you're already using a CDN and you're using a separate storage, then you know that that storage must be accessible to outside requests. There's things that you can do from a CDN perspective to lock that down. So in a multi-CDN, you need to make sure that the configurations are the same. In other words, if you're doing, say, if you're storing content in S3, and S3 has an authentication process, you need to make sure that you roll that out across both of your CDNs, and you need to make sure that those CDNs support those authentication methods when pulling content into the CDN. There's other ways that you can do that using headers, using IP allow lists, things like that. So there's a lot of things that you can do. But I just wanted to point out the obvious here that all the files in your storage have to be accessible from the CDNs in order to deliver that content. A nice to have is content available in multiple regions. So if you do have a storage, let's say you're using S3, if you are doing worldwide distribution of that content, it's usually good to have it stored in the United States and Europe and Asia, so those cache misses don't go as far back for the CDN. It's not really a dual CDN thing, but if you're already using a CDN, you probably are already doing this. The last thing is programmatical ingest. So if you're just using FTP to kind of upload your content, you might want to look into other ways of getting content into your storage, especially when you're using a dual CDN, because now paths become important, directories become important, those types of things. So you might want to look at a different way to get content into the CDN.
Okay, great. So now at this point, we do have time for questions. I'm going to do a quick summary, but down below you'll see an Ask a Question box. We've got a few comments come in, among other things. We have a musician in the house. But so in summary, just to wrap up the things we talked about while you're typing in your questions, first was the challenges to watch for, which included things like the changes to your workflow. In some cases, you are going to need to have parity in configuration, but as Brian pointed out, that's not always the case depending on what your load balancing / CDN selection scheme is. But then you do have resources, and that's a big issue, development cost, integration cost, and training cost. So those are all some of the things that can come into play with a multi-CDN environment. And again, Limelight has spent a lot of time in these realms and handles it well. Managing multiple CDNs was the next topic. This notion of how you choose the CDN selection, how you choose which CDN is going to serve which user in which sessions, and then security, and finally performance tracking. And then we talked about how you want to make sure that you tailor multi-CDN environment to your workflow, whether it's live video, video on demand, website delivery, or file download. And then storage is important in many workflows, and with multi-CDN, it continues to be. So Just a little bit about the company that's bringing you this. Again, we have a lot of expertise in multi-CDN, and Brian, thanks again for joining us today. So just a little bit about Limelight. Limelight is an excellent choice for a multi-CDN environment. If you're looking for delivery performance and scale, security, origin storage, all of those things are part of and strengths of the Limelight network. And then those professional services can help take a load off of your resources and support things ever do go wrong. What kind of support might you need? So with that, let's go on to the Q&A. Now, we did get a few questions that came in advance. We'll start with those, but also I want to, again, encourage you, if you have questions, there's a box down at the bottom. Just type in your Ask a Question. So the first question is, how do you handle closed captioning support with multiple CDNs?
Yeah, so closed captioning, I kind of think about it in the same realm as I was talking about with DRM, right? So there's two ways to deliver closed captioning. One is to encode it into the video. We have a video platform where it ingests, DXP files, caption files, and what it does is when you ingest those caption files with the video, it basically on the encode, it embeds those closed captions into the video itself. And so when you're dealing with multiple CDNs, it really doesn't matter. If one CDN is delivering that file with the captions already in the video, it's not going to change any of your workflow. The other way is some people might sideload the captions directly into the player. Again, it makes no effect on how many CDNs you have because either the captions are encoded into the video or they're just sent directly to the client. So similar to DRM, it's all done before the CDNs anyway, so it doesn't really make a difference.
Great. Okay, thanks. The next question, how does Limelight take care of load balancing and switching between CDNs in a multi-CDN setup?
So Limelight offers a traffic director. It's a DNS-based system. So like that first method that I was talking to you guys about as far as making a CDN decision, it's all based on DNS. We can do percentage, CDN A gets this much percentage, CDN B gets that much percentage, that type of thing. And up or down, it can do geo decisions. In the United States, I want this CDN to take it. It can get down to the marketing level where you can have different regions, each CDN delivering in different regions, that type of thing. It can also be used to load balance origins. I've seen our system used there where not only can you use a DNS load balancer on the front end, you can use it on the back end to make decisions on which origin to pull content from. So yeah, so we do have a product that we offer that offers it on a DNS perspective. When you're talking about more of a programmatical method or a manifest decision method for video or an API method, then you would have to contact some third parties. We've implemented this with a lot of the players out there. DLVR is one, Sodexis is another, Conviva is another, and NPAW, nice people at work. So we've done a lot of implementations with these companies, and they're doing really great things on the end user switching side of things.
Okay, great. The next question is, please speak to delivering multiple CDNs on an ad hoc per event basis versus on an install/permanent basis. Right.
So I think on the first workflow that I did as far as a live workflow, it would still follow that same workflow. You have either a camera for a live event. Let's say you're shooting a live event, then you'll have a camera. If it's a linear live at 24/7, it's still the same workflow. The only thing that you really want to pay attention to is live events are different in the way that the content is being served. We look at live event traffic differently than we do a live linear channel. The reason for that is the spikes. When you turn on a live event, boom, everyone joins at once. Your userships shoot straight up in the air, hopefully to a very high level. and then once the event is finished, the traffic drops off and you don't have any more CDN. So you want to make sure that your CDN is optimized for that type of traffic. Using things like Origin Shield to protect your origin, things like that. So really, you just need to think about on the CDN level, as far as being a dual CDN, it doesn't change anything. You just want to make sure that your CDN is optimized for delivering that type of traffic.
Okay, great. The next question is somewhat related. What is your recommendation for pre-warming a cache for content that is expected to see a spike in requests at a certain time?
I think it depends on the traffic, the level of traffic that you're going to have, right? So we do things like, we can do things that protect your origin, but we also, for very large clients that are rolling out very large, let's say software updates, or if it's an on-demand video, it gets a little more complicated because what you need to do is basically grab the manifest and you need to pre-cache all of those segments, which is something we can do. But I think it's a very good idea if it's a very large event. If it's not so much of a large event, I don't think it's that important. It also depends on where you're storing that content. Excuse me. So think about it from a perspective of Limelight, where we have a cloud storage. We have a storage that's on the same network as our CDN. So it's not as important to pre-warm that cache. Also, if you are using an S3, you want to make sure that your CDN has very good peering with S3 origins, that type of thing. So again, if it's a very high traffic event that's going to happen, that you know people are going to hit it really hard, like, I don't know, Game of Thrones is getting released or something, or you have, an Apple iOS release or something like that where you know traffic is going to be high, then I think it's important to pre-cache for sure.
Great. Okay. We have time for one more question. How important is the performance of your storage in relation to the performance of your CDN?
It's very important on a cache miss, right? So if you are requesting traffic, the CDN doesn't have it in cache, it goes back to the storage, and the storage has a delay in delivering that traffic, then you can imagine it has a cascading effect through delivering that traffic. I think if you look at it from a dual CDN perspective, as I stated before, so I think like when you look at different events, or like a live event versus a on-demand video or a software delivery, the thing about live events is you think about it, those segments are only going to be cached for a few seconds, right? So, and then they're not going to be used anymore. So you talk about things in CDN world, we talk about cache efficiency. Limelight lives in about the 90 to 95% cache efficiency. So your storage is still going to be delivering 10% of that traffic. So normally what people do is they'll front end their storage with some type of delivery system. If you're delivering on cloud, if you're storing on an S3, it might be important for you to spin up a CloudFront to front that content, so the CDNs can pull that content very quickly. For us, with our storage, we make our content available to other CDNs to pull from, and what we do is we front end that with our CDN, so we know that it's going to be high performant, so the CDNs can pull it. So it's very important that your storage is front-ended by a high-performance network so the CDNs can pull that content in as soon as they need it. It's very important in a video world where your segments are, say, 5 to 10 seconds in length. Okay. If we can't pull that into cache, then you can see that the
actually,
problem.
I'm trying to squeeze one more question in here. What resources do customers have to help them onboard?
What customers have, or well?
Did we lose Brian?
I'm here.
Well,
can
I'll
you hear me?
answer that one. What resources do customers have to help them onboard? Well, Brian is an SE, which is a solutions engineer. Another set of resources is ASAs, our advanced solutions architects, and that team is really more of a development arm that is able to consult and figure out what needs to be done, and then again, based on the expertise we have, it's generally pretty straightforward to implement the solution to tie it all together. So with that, we'd like to thank everyone. A few small housekeeping items. Again, the Resources tab, as Diana mentioned at the beginning, is in the upper right, and it shows resources that are available to you. There's a web page, data sheet, white paper, and a tech brief. And then finally, you will get a follow-up email with a link so that you can send it to friends and colleagues that are interested. And then finally, for more information, you can visit limelight.com, email info@limelight.com, or call 602-850-5000. And with that, we'll say thank you to everyone for attending, and have a great day.